Greetings, this is Dr. Jess again, and welcome to part 10 of Health Hacks with Dr. Jess. This is our second installment of the natural treatment of mental illness, and join me. Let's review what we spoke about last week. Last week we said mental illnesses are multifactorial, many factors that contribute to it. The symptoms that are expressed as mental illness, things like OCD, ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disease, have their origins both psychologically and physiologically. So listen up. By the time you have this, there's usually two basic origins, and it doesn't matter which came first, the chicken or the egg. Both ends of this particular spectrum must be treated. And sadly, in our world today, the physiological causations and manifestations are not adequately considered or treated. So they tend to be the stone that has been left unturned if you look at the graphic. Okay, and this is what I do. This is why I'm very successful with what I do, because by the time people get to me, they've been here, there, everywhere, and are not getting the results they're looking for. And when I look at the physiologic aspects, it's usually there where the problem is. Last week we spoke about neurotransmitters, those chemicals that transmit information across the nerves, and they were divided into excitatory things that wake you up and give you focus, and inhibitory things that calm you down and allow you to relax. I also introduced you to the brain wall, which is a graphic that is available to the general public that specifically talked about excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters, what kind of symptoms you had when they were low, what kind of symptoms you had when they were high. It talked about the various parts of the brain and what they do, okay, and what dysfunction looks like. And generally, if there's dysfunction, let's say in the prefrontal cortex, certain symptoms usually show up. And then we also talked about the various neurotransmitters that were dominant in the areas. Now, this is available commercially at the websites that you see below. If you can't get them from this video and you'd like to look into it, just email me. I'll give you my email address at the end of this, and you'll be able to look into it and purchase it or whatever. The same factors that injure or damage a cell can result in mental or emotional symptoms. This was the cell danger response we talked about several podcasts ago, and then things that injure a cell, which kind of makes sense, are chemical and physical things like heavy metals, shock, radiation, and so forth, microbial issues, mold, fungi, bacteria, parasites, viruses, and what has been proven on a scientific basis that all the psychological, emotional, and spiritual traumas that we face will injure the cell just as much as those other factors. Some of the obvious causes or causes of distress and imbalances, toxins, xenobiotics, dietary peptides, dysbiosis, and of course all the microbial illnesses. But in our society, the thing that affects us the most is stress. I hope you like that graphic. We also spoke of the neuroendoimmune supersystem. That is the nervous system which puts out neurotransmitters, is in constant communication with the hormonal or endocrine system, which is also in constant communication with the immune system, which is affected by chronic inflammation, leaky gut syndrome, histamine. These three systems tend to talk to one another. And the fact is, when one system goes out of whack, you can think of it that way, there's a great possibility that the other systems go out of whack because what happens to one happens to all. And that's why if your, let's say, hormonal replacement therapy isn't working, one really needs to look at the other systems in order to fix that. So this week we're going to dive into what depletes neurotransmitters. And this particular graphic says that neurotransmitter deficiency can lead to depression. Well, that's true. So I'm going to show you a bunch of graphics and animation and just go along with my explanation, okay? So this is optimal activity. We're going to talk about a neuron that creates dopamine. And you can see in the middle of the neuron, That tyrosine creates L-dopa, which creates dopamine. Now that dopamine, the little blue dots, goes into these things called vesicles. Think of them as warehouses, okay? That's the storage area. And then they go into the synapse, which is that cleft in between the two nerves, when it's called for. And that neurotransmitter, that chemical, will go to those receptors, the things that look like little rectangles. And when they get onto the receptors, they transmit the message, but then they pop off. And what happens is they either hang around with their buddies, or they're broken down by COMT. If you want the big word, it's catechol-methyltransferase. Remember, when I say something fast, ignore it. Okay, or they're maintained because there's a reuptake mechanism, something that reabsorbs part of it so it can get recycled. This is called optimal activity. If we were to look at it on a graph, it would look like this. Now look at the graph, the y-axis going up and down, you see optimal range, and orange you see the neurotransmitter stores are in the optimal range, and the neurotransmitter activity is also in the optimal range. And the x-axis going right or left is in months and years. Okay? So you encounter stressors. Stress increases the need for neurotransmitters. Okay, but you have plenty in the storage, you have plenty in the warehouses. So even though the stores may be depleting, you've got enough to handle the high activity. It would look on a graph like this, where the neurotransmitter stores, the orange, are still within the optimal range, although they're decreasing, and the neurotransmitter activity is quite high. Nevertheless, you don't feel this because you're handling it. With chronic stress, what you need to know is that the neurotransmitters are not created as quickly as they're needed. So the stores are still decreasing. You have what I like to call optimal looking activity, which means that the stores are really decreasing, but you still have optimal activity. In other words, you don't feel it. And again, let's look at the graph. The neurotransmitter stores, the orange line, is now below the optimal range, but the neurotransmitter activity is within the normal range. Again, you don't feel this. And notice the x-axis on the bottom right to left. We're talking months and years. Now, after a long time, when there is real low or no stores of neurotransmitters, you have low activity. There's simply not enough neurotransmitters to transmit all the impulses. And there's improper communication. What does that mean? Well, both the neurotransmitter activity and the neurotransmitter stores are below the optimal range, and this is where you get symptoms. Now understand that this is a long time coming. Okay? This is a long time coming. And the medications that are used do not address the lack of production of the neurotransmitter. So when they give you a reuptake inhibitor, serotonin reuptake inhibitor, dopamine, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, this is what happens. Okay? You get that optimal looking activity because the lack of reuptake keeps the neurotransmitters at a certain level. But, it's doomed to fail. Because when you get to the point that you simply don't have enough neurotransmitter in that synaptic cleft, it doesn't matter how much reuptake inhibitor you take, there's simply not enough to create normal communication. Or as my mother would say, if you ain't got it, you ain't got it. Okay? So the big difficulty in taking medications, and I'm not anti-medication, understand that I have lots of training in traditional and non-traditional medicine. I've been in both areas. Told you I've been around for a while. Okay, I am against the injudicious use of medications. I'm also against the injudicious use of supplements, herbals, and stuff like that. I think it goes both ways. Okay, one has to strike a middle if you're going to be a good holistic practitioner. My colleagues tend to look at me and say, Jess, you're too simple. Well, I'm not really simple, but yeah, I won't take offense at that. I believe Albert Einstein's wisdom is saying that if you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. But I'm going to take that one step further, not forward, further. Okay, if you can't explain something to a 6-year-old to the point that that 6-year-old can explain it to another 6-year-old, you don't know it well yourself. You see, people, the job of a physician or any kind of healthcare provider is to explain things in a manner that anybody can understand it, which means you have to be awful flexible. When you go to somebody, they're using these big, tall, polysyllabic words, okay? They're not doing it to impress you. They seem to be telling you, oh, I know my stuff. Well, that's nice. But if I can't explain it to you, which is my job, I'm really saying that I don't know it that well. People who hide behind all these fancy terms really don't know it well, or they're unwilling to teach. That's not somebody you want to be with. And life, neurotransmitters is all about balance. I want to talk about something else right now. Okay, one of the most ignored stressors is emotional trauma. And I got to tell you, this is worse than any of the microbial or physical traumas. Okay? And that's that third circle, the yelling abuse, the psychological, emotional, and spiritual traumas. According to the American Psychological Association, emotional trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives, which means they're not processing it. Some of the commonly overlooked causes of emotional trauma are things like falls or sports injuries, surgeries, sudden death of somebody you love, a car accident, breakup of a significant relationship, a humiliating or deeply disappointing experience, or the discovery of a life-threatening illness or disabling condition. I created this particular graphic just to bring out a point. If an emotional trauma happens, upper left, yeah, there's a real insult to the psyche. And this is where you have trouble processing, it's overwhelming, but this is the best time to seek professional help. Because if you let it go, you start that feeling of hopelessness, carelessness for yourself, not feeling good about yourself, being unlovable, worthless, and ugly. And this happens especially after a rape, okay? PTSD sets in. And think of it this way. Think of Chernobyl. There was a big meltdown, okay, of the atomic pile. And what did they do? They put concrete over it. Okay, not a bad idea. You're containing the atomic pile, but it's still working. So that's okay for the beginning. But if you let it sit for many years, like it is happening right now, the concrete cracks and the radiation comes out different ways. So what's a really good idea is that if something like this has happened to you, evaluate in yourself if you've really worked through it, or are you just covering it with concrete? And the way you do that is look at your life and look at the pattern of things, and you might see that that's actually what's been going on. And these type of traumas kind of work in the background constantly. So here's some sage advice. If you're a practitioner and you're inquiring about traumas, okay, or you learn about it from a friend, especially sexual trauma, when that door gets open, close it immediately. Okay, you're not trained, unless you are, to deal with the psychological complexities of PTSD. You don't want that person, friend or patient, to relive the trauma. What you should do is assess their support systems, and if they've had none or if they've taken care of it, quote unquote, themselves, you might want to suggest that they create a relationship with the appropriate professional. I had a patient one time, and she was raped, and her rapist went to jail. And 2 years later, she's going about her normal business. She's in the grocery store, and she sees the mother of the rapist on the grocery line. No interaction whatsoever. The mother of the rapist was just there looking to check out the groceries. Okay? No eye contact, no nothing. That unfortunate woman woke up 3 days later in a lockdown psychiatric unit. Okay? So if you haven't worked it through, see somebody, talk about it, a professional, and you can have a better life. So always remember, in everything we do, first do no harm. Okay? So next week, we're going to talk about the tests that can be done for neurotransmitters and how they're interpreted. Listen, I'm going to give you a basic idea. Interpreting neurotransmitter tests is, is one of my great specialties, my great ability, okay? And it took years to get there, but I can give you an idea of what to look at in the patterns. And some basic, safe supplemental protocols in dealing with neurotransmitter imbalances or the various symptoms. Just remember, if you have depression, that doesn't mean your serotonin is low. It can be the dopamine that's low. It could be just imbalances in the neurotransmitter system or chronic inflammation. This stuff gets very complex, but I do want you to have some armamentarium. Okay? I would like you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, tell your friends. You obviously have been telling your friends because the views of these podcasts went from 30 or 40 to 245 last week. Okay, and about 30 or 40 people subscribed to my channel. I'm giving out good information. I simply want you to have the information to advocate for yourselves. If you want to ask me a question, please email me at jess.jessarmine.com. And of course, if you wanted the link to the brain wall, please email me. I'd be happy to give it to you. And if you have problems that you think I might be helpful with, or you'd just like to check it out, go ahead and go to my website and book a free 20-minute Get Acquainted Zoom conference. Okay? Why should you think of treating with me? Well, I'm very well educated. I've got a lot of degrees. I've been on both sides of the fence, and I'm a true holistic practitioner. I look at everything, and I've been doing it for 5 decades. Okay? And let me tell you something. Suffering is not a given. The natural treatment of mental illness is my specialty. If you've had tons of treatment or a loved one has and they're still suffering, I think it's worth a conversation with me. Okay, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to pay me, just a conversation to see if there's something that can be done. And frankly, I'm the doctor that will give you the time and empathy you need to heal. And as always, if no one told you they love you today, remember Dr. Jess does. We'll see you next week.